So, last week I actually got Joe to do the unthinkable. It was really hard to do.
Was it really though?
It was. You almost didn't make it, Joe.
I mean,
Don't lie to us. We got
I
Joe
did. I
to
did just laugh a little bit.
we we got Joe to watch and finish a Quentin Tarantino movie.
I never
Uh,
said I never finished them. I always finished them. I just fell asleep during them.
that doesn't count. You didn't finish it then.
No, no, like I woke up and I saw the rest of it.
No, Joe. That's like if you're taking a test and you leave like 10 of the questions blank and you wake up for the last 5 questions and you just fill those in. You didn't finish the
No,
test.
yeah, you did. You just got all those other
No, you
questions
turned in a partial
wrong.
grade. Anyways, we're not talking about Kill Bill yet because I gotta rewind. Um, as I said in the last podcast, I've been watching through some Quentin Tarantino movies to get ready for his new release, and I watched Jackie Brown for the first time. This was his third film. Um, I really like this movie, and I think it might be his most underrated movie from what I've seen. People's opinions are, and I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. So Jackie Brown is the story of a female flight attendant who smuggles money for a arms lord who's played by Samuel L. Jackson, and he's the villain of the movie. And Jackie Brown is the flight attendant, and she gets caught in this whole conspiracy, and she gets sold out, and she's trying to double cross Odell, which is Samuel's character, while also trying to double cross the cops who are on her. Just so many crosses. It's looking like Christmas out here, and it ends up being like a really compelling story with a lot of fun characters, and just so Jackie Brown herself is like just really likable, where she's just kind of like a no nonsense badass woman. Where a big theme of the movie is growing old and feeling like you're running out of time,
Hmm.
and I that was like a we're not even that old, but I was like, holy shit, that really resonates already. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's such a good character motivation for a character where she thinks to herself, she works in this shitty airline that goes between Mexico. She makes $13,000 a year plus a couple of benefits, and she's like, every time I get somewhere in life, something always makes me have to go back and have to reset. And I'm running out of time to reset. You can only reset so many times before you're too old. Um, which is why she smuggles the money for the extra income. It's the only way that she can actually make any sizable income with how little she actually makes from her job. And it also motivates her to try to get away with it and double cross both the cops and Odell and other parties. And you just end up really liking her by the end of the movie because of that motivation.
Yeah, no, I like that because it's not like a super standard motivation. Like, I guess like you can't say it. I guess I can't say it hasn't been done before, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that has a motivation like that.
Me
Um,
neither. Yeah.
and yeah, I really like seeing that kind of thing.
it's it's really good too because like she's like a 42-year-old black woman who is just trying to get by, and she's an anti-hero. She's not a good person. She is committing crimes, um but she's trying to get ahead in life, and she does have a good heart. It's very Quentin Tarantino-esque to have a character who is an anti-hero as the main character.
Yeah,
And what makes these movies work is that even though you have an anti-hero, you always have a villain who's worse, which is where Odell comes in. Um, he is just, as soon as you're introduced to him, like the movie starts off with this really good opening scene of Jackie trying to run to the plane, and the music and the camera work is just so fun. And like you don't even have to, you don't even get dialogue from Jackie, and you already know a lot about her just from that scene. But then you immediately transition to a scene that introduces the villain, and that's where all the dialogue comes in. It's got all the Quentin Tarantino great dialogue that he does. Something that actually is missing from Kill Bill in a lot of ways, which we'll talk about later. This was a lot more traditional, and it starts with him talking a guy who he bailed out of jail into coming with him to go do a hit on, or like to go intimidate some other gun dealers or something. and he's like, "Hey, I need you to jump in the trunk and pop out with this gun when they show up. And I bailed you out, so you got to do this. Like you owe me one." And the guy's like, "Okay, yeah." And he climbs into the trunk reluctantly, and then Odell shoots him to death and then drives him off because he was a burden and he thinks that he flipped on him, which he finds out later that he did. And I think that's a really good way to set your main villain, because he just talked someone into helping you dispose of their own body, which is something only like a Quentin Tarantino villain could do, because dialogue is the strength of these movies. So I thought that was like a really fun way to set your villain.
And I think you already clarified this was like the last Tarantino movie that you had not seen, right?
There's another one I haven't seen, and I don't really want to see it, but maybe I will, because it's not even he did like a part of the movie, and it shows up in the Wikipedia, and like I'll see when I get there.
Death Proof.
It's Death Proof, yeah. It'd be after Kill Bill 2 on my rewatch. Maybe I'll do it, but just seeing how much he borrowed from this movie and other movies, especially like when crafting a villain and crafting an anti-hero, really good. Another cool thing, I was talking about how we don't get to see Jackie very much in the beginning, and it takes 27 minutes before she utters a single line, and it's her getting caught with the money that she smuggled in, and they also threw in some coke to get her extra busted, which gets her even more screwed. And then the movie just goes on from there. There's a character called Max Cherry, who's a bondsman, and he's a really good character. He's probably like the one good guy in the story who's pretty much purely good. And yeah, it's just a really fun movie. I won't go into how the story goes, but it's really fulfilling. The climax is kind of like deliberately really fast. I think I saw an interview where Quentin Tarantino does that on purpose, which is pretty interesting. He likes to build you up and then kind of undercut the climax, which I guess is more realistic. Sometimes the getting there is a lot more intense than the actual final confrontation. And
this would be like an underrated movie. Like, it sounds like it probably has more going on than people give it credit for.
I feel like out of his first 3 movies, if I was to recommend you guys a movie, it'd be this one. And speaking of out of his first 3 movies, I'd put this above the other 2 easily, which I was surprised coming in. I didn't know I'd like it this much, but this is definitely his best movie out of his first 3, which is probably not a common thing to say. But yeah, Jackie Brown, very good. Which moves us into the next Quentin Tarantino movie, which would have been Kill Bill, which we all watched together, so we can actually all talk about this one, which is pretty fun.
Yay!
Joe, what did you think of Kill Bill?
I liked it. I also feel like, though, when I was watching this movie, I kind of realized 2 things. Number one, it was a thing that I feel like let me back up a little bit. Well, you described this movie as like live action anime, and I think you're pretty on point.
No, this is super. This is the most anime it's been, man.
Yeah,
anime adaptations aren't this anime.
Yeah, and I think part of that why is there's a bit of like exaggeration that happens in anime and animation, because that's just the art of that medium, where like, you don't have like real life actors that you can have a face-to-face connection to. Like, there's a intrinsically primal thing that people have where it's like, oh, that's a person, I'm just gonna connect to that person, I don't relate to them because they have a face.
Yeah.
And for animation, you have to like sell that more by making it more exaggerated action and like actions of their movements or their facial expressions or their words, and that happens a lot in this movie. And I felt like after watching things like, Battle Angel Alita, which did not feel like that, it felt too grounded. It was like, oh, that's missing. You need to actually kind of really go into that campiness and that over exaggeration a lot if you want to get that feel. The other thing I realized that kind of frustrates me is that this seems like a precursor to like the start of what would have been a lot of movies like this, but then that never took off. And it's kind of like,
that feels like a frustration more at the universe than the movie itself.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Because yeah, it definitely like there despite this being an action movie from what 2001, 2002, there's so little like it.
Mhm.
Nothing really tries to be this, and it's because I think it's really bold how he tries to tell his story here with different art styles and very different settings and a lot of different tones in a lot of scenes as well. Like there's a lot going on in this movie, even if it's also pretty simple compared to his other movies. Um, for me, I'd say like this is the most rewatchable movie, maybe of all time. But I actually think that Kill Bill 2 is more interesting. I lump them both into one, where Joe kind of got the disservice of only watching Kill Bill 1. I feel like to really get the experience here, you got to watch both of the movies, which hopefully we'll get to 2 sometime soon.
Yeah,
So
and
we
I
can see how it
think
concludes.
during our watch through, I think there were multiple moments where you would point something out, and I was like, "Whoa, I've never noticed that before."
Was there an example of one?
Uh, we watched it a little over a week ago. I can't remember.
Yeah, there's a bunch of little things, a lot of little subtle things. Where I think one of them was, they do some subtle ways of showing how much of a badass the bride is. Which, for example, in the scene where Elle is gonna go kill her, no, that's actually not the one. In the scene where she wakes up from her coma,
Oh yeah,
she wakes up and she's freaking out. She realizes she lost her baby. First of all, she looks at her hand and she can immediately tell it's been 4 years. So she's got some weird palm reading knowledge going on right off the bat. And then she hears someone coming down across the hall. She's kind of spooked. She thinks everyone might be connected to Bill at this point because she just woke up. And she lays down and her heart rate slows down to a crawl within like 3 seconds, which I was like, that's some ninja shit.
it
And
really
it's
is.
it's really they really don't draw attention to it. It's really a background thing. And I mean, she can also cure her legs from atrophy within like 11 hours, I think it was. So I feel like that feeds into that. And that's just the supernatural like abilities that she has outside of actual fighting, which we see a couple of times throughout this movie. Where in the opening scene, I think it's a really good opening scene where she's fighting Vanita Green, I think is her name, and she gets in there. She's immediately fighting her as soon as the door opens. They're doing this badass knife fight. It's really painful. There's some good hits in there. The action in this movie is just very, very weighty. The sound effects really help. I think Joe brought that up while we were watching.
It
And
makes it like it kind of adds something that makes you really feel you're more there. I guess it's hard to describe.
it's
You
also part
feel
of the
more,
over the topness that you were talking about as
yeah,
well.
and you feel more like invested and kind of just more immersed into the action that's happening when there's some sort of like response to what's happening, like them just swinging the swords and then missing. There's that whooshing sound.
Yeah.
It gives you that feeling of them actually like missing instead of like it just seemed lazy.
And that scene ends up transitioning to them stopping the fight because the daughter comes home. And they have a nice Quentin Tarantino conversation. They're chilling. She's making cereal. They're having coffee. I really like how Vanita's immediately like, oh, I remember how you like your coffee. Because it shows that they knew each other really well before she fucking betrayed her. And it just breaks into a very quick sequence where she kills her. And the daughter sees it, and it immediately sets up that like we're dealing with a traditional anti-hero, as all these movies do, where she's willing to kill the mom, and she didn't want to do it, but she also doesn't apologize for it. She says your mom had it coming. I thought that was a really strong opening scene for the movie. And in general, I think every scene in this movie is very good to adding something to the story. Like the scene where she's getting the sword from Hattori Hanzo is like really serene, and you can tell like how magical these swords are just from how she reacts to them. And of course, there's the big fight scene at the end, which is pretty lengthy. She goes through all of the crazy 88, and then also Oren, and both of those have really good components to them. Where just the action in the Crazy 88 scene is just nuts. She's jumping all around. She's balancing on the rails. She's slicing people in half. She's decapitating people. She's doing breakdance moves. She's fucking swinging on bamboo shoots. It's like peak anime, and that it's even more anime than the anime sequences in the movie, which are also there, where they're explaining Oren's background, which I've always liked a lot. And then the final scene and the final, I guess not the final scene, but the final fight, that location where they fight is just so beautiful. Really like the atmosphere of that fight, and it really feels that Oren is kind of like mid-fight. She apologizes. She realizes like how wrong she was for disrespecting her and betraying her in the past, but it's too late now. And she even like the bride even asks, "Are you ready to die? Then come at me with all you got." All these like just anime intense battle lines, and somehow it just kind of fits within the tone that the movie set. So yeah, just really love this movie. It's one of my favorites. It's not complete without Volume 2 though, which there's a lot to talk about that.
Yeah, this movie, I think even when it came out, I think a lot of people considered it an instant classic.
Yeah, I think it got good buzz when it came out. I was too young to remember, but yeah. Joe, any last thoughts on your first watch of Kill Bill?
Movie's good. I put it in my top 15, maybe.
Well, damn, that's okay. That's better than I thought.
Well,
I
shit.
think you'll reflect even better in the Volume 2, where Volume 1 has a lot of the action and the visceral murdering of this revenge, but Part 2 really reflects on that and also gives you a lot more character. And it has Bill, and Bill's really fun. I think you'll like him.
God, Bill.
I think another thing I wanted to really kind of just say real quickly that I don't think anyone's attempted until recently, the past 3 years, is this seems to be like almost like a test show, saying like you could do a yearly, like long story with movies. If that makes sense. I don't know when the two came out. I have to actually think up here.
I think it was
and
2
it came
years
out
after.
Well, Kill Bill Volume 1 came out in 2003. Volume 2 came out in 2004.
Well, there we go. Never mind.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make there is like it feels like almost like yeah, you can do like a long form storytelling kind of thing, and like that really hasn't like happened. That didn't happen for a long time until like the MCU showed up, and then now like John Wick I think is the next kind of version of that, where they're coming out with a movie that has its own story and it's over.
Now hold on. What about Indiana Jones and Star Wars and Matrix?
So here's the thing. So with Indiana Jones, each of those movies are individual kind of stories. They take place. You can watch any of them in any order, and like they basically they don't have any kind of reference to each other. Star Wars is like it never set out to be. It didn't start out as a saga. It was one movie and then got expanded on. Like it was just paid for as like they're like, oh, this did really well, and then let's make more of them kind of deal. There was no real planning for that series, and same with Indiana Jones. But like MCU is like really that first one that kind of was like, oh, we can actually like take these and really tell a long form story going forward. And then I think John Wick is the other one that's kind of like the point is you watch these movies back to back to back to back. Like they're able to flow into each other like immediately. If that makes sense. And
But
they're
I'd say
short.
I still say those are standalones, where I feel like they, especially the first one, and possibly
that was the
the
other
third one, I feel like they were like, well, if this is the last one, we're fine, but we'll make more if we can.
But like that's the other point is that they also make these movies where like you can watch them individually and still get some satisfaction from it. Like
Yeah.
there's a beginning, middle, and end in Volume 1 of Kill Bill, but it's not the end of the whole story. But there is definitely a structure there. Whereas like if you look at Empire Strikes Back, it kind of just doesn't have an ending. It just the movie just stops basically.
I guess it's also like, to add on to what you're saying, I guess,
Mhm.
if you finish Kill Bill 1, you immediately feel that there's a hole there. Like, it's setting up from a sequel from the get-go, and it's not... the sequel is probably gonna happen because it's Quentin Tarantino. He'll find a way to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And while a lot of first movies, they'll set up like a sequel kind of loosely. It's like, hey, if this does well, we'll do another one. There's a little hint over here at the end, but this one's like very explicitly like, you tell Bill I'm coming for him next film in 2004.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, you feel there's some sort of satisfaction to that ending of Kill Bill 1.
Yeah.
You know? There's no, like they set things up for sure, but it doesn't feel like they've left a lot of, like, holes in your, like, in this story they were trying to tell. Like, for example, like, the Tricks Are for Kids thing, like, if you don't see Kill Bill Volume 2, which I haven't, you just see that as a joke, as, like, a funny little gag that's thrown in there, which apparently has some sort of significance in Volume 2.
It's not even that significant. It's just like, it explains it a little more, but in the end, it's still just a joke and an inside joke at that.
But like, you can have setups and deliveries later. But the big thing is they maintain its own personal story, but still is able to expand on later. But yeah, whatever.
Good stuff. Bradley, you got anything before we move on?
This is a movie where, if in the current day someone has not watched it, I'm kind of surprised. Like,
I definitely think this is a good introductory Quentin Tarantino movie. It has a lot of his storytelling techniques without getting like super dialogue heavy, which is where some of the slower scenes for a first time viewer might come in. So I think this is a good one. Yeah, there you go. Kill Bill. Oh, one more thing that I should say on the podcast so I can make it the podcast title. While we were watching, Joe called Bill a griefer. So
yeah,
we all got a kick out of that. So the title will most likely be Bill is a griefer unless something good comes up later.
Why
he is a pretty big griefer.
Because he griefs the bride. You were right. He is a griefer.